Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the weekly Facebook Live Bible Study, Week 30. Last week, we discussed the first part of Proverbs, and we discussed what Proverbs is and how the book began. We also discussed the first half of Timothy. We talked about the first 3 chapters. This week, we are going to be talking about Proverbs Part 2, the ancient sayings that apply wisdom and the fear of the Lord to every life topic one can imagine, and the important issues raised in this book. We're also going to talk about the second part of 1 Timothy, which is the continuation of issues Paul addressed. Without further ado, let's jump into Proverbs Part 2, otherwise known as chapters 10 through 31. In chapters 10 through 29, we finally come to the collection of Proverbs. Here are hundreds of ancient sayings that apply wisdom and the fear of the Lord to every life topic you can imagine, including family, work, community life, friendship, sex, marriage, money, anger, forgiveness, alcohol, and debt. These proverbs are short and easy to memorize. This section of the book is meant to become like a reference book or a reference work to which you return time after time for the rest of your life. This raises an important issue in reading this book. Proverbs are by nature about probabilities. If a person fears the Lord and makes wise, moral choices, things will likely go well for them. If a person doesn't fear the Lord and acts foolish, their life will more likely turn out poorly. Both of these statements are often true, but not always. Therefore, Proverbs are not promises of guaranteed formulas for success. Instead, fearing God and being moral is likely to lead a better, longer life. Raising your kids in a stable, loving home can set them up well for the rest of their lives, but there's no guarantee. Lots of things can and do go wrong in our world. Proverbs by nature focus on the general rule and not the numerous exceptions to that rule. The biblical wisdom books are not ignorant about this. In fact, these exceptions to moral rules are what books of Job and Ecclesiastes are all about. Life is too complex for formulas, which is why we need all these books of accumulated wisdom to get the bigger picture. This all leads to the final section of the book, in chapters 30 to 31, where we find 2 large collections of poems. The first comes from a man named Agur, who begins by acknowledging his ignorance and folly, as well as his great need for God's wisdom. He then discovers that divine wisdom has been given to him through the scriptures. Agur is put before us as a model reader of Proverbs and someone who is always open to hearing God's wisdom. The final chapter, chapter 31, is connected to a man named Lemuel, a non-Israelite king who passes on the wisdom given to him by his mother. Most of this chapter is made up of guidance for being a wise and just leader. But the final poem is an acrostic or alphabet poem. Each line begins with a new letter from the Hebrew alphabet and tells the story of a woman of noble character. This woman lives according to the wisdom of Proverbs and stands as a model of someone who takes God's wisdom and translates it into practical decisions in everyday life, at work, at home, in her family, and in her community. The book of Proverbs opened with words from father to son about listening to Lady Wisdom, and it appropriately closes by offering the words from a mother to son about a woman who lives wisely. This is a book for everyone in every season of life. It's a reliable guide for learning to live wisely and well in God's good word. That concludes the book of Proverbs. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, we ask that you post them, and together we can grow in Christ by addressing them. Now, let's move on to the second part of Timothy, which is chapters 4 through 6. Paul's second section of instruction are in chapters 4 through 6 and are centered around specific problems caused by false teachers. Paul once again corrects their bad theology, in which they tell people to stop eating certain foods as well as to stop getting married, which Paul thinks is ridiculous. Paul appeals to Genesis 1 and reminds Timothy that the entire creation is good, including all foods and marriage. All of it is to be received with gratitude by those who know the Creator. Paul then moves on to address problems with the church's care of widows. The important ministry was being abused by younger, wealthy women. They would sign up for the church's support and then spend their days sleeping around, spreading gossip, and damaging the church's reputation. Paul put his foot down. He makes it clear to Timothy that the older widows with no other family support should qualify. For widows who really need it, the church should allow and show the same love and generosity of Jesus. Next, Paul writes about the problems among the older men in the church. Timothy is to respect their age but not their misbehavior, which seems related to alcohol abuse. Whatever exactly it is they're doing, it's damaging the church's reputation in Ephesus. Timothy is to lovingly confront them and have them step down if they are in a leadership position. Paul adds on a side note that this does not mean Timothy himself should never drink. Given his stomach problems, he should in fact have a glass of wine each night with dinner. In chapter 6, Paul addresses a problem with some of the Christians in Ephesus, who were slaves and were disrespecting their Christian masters. This was tricky for Paul. On one hand, the gospel creates equality among all of Jesus' followers, but that equality must be implemented in a strategic way that doesn't compromise the mission of the church. If Christians become associated with slave rebellions, they will undermine the effectiveness of their message. The Christian transformation of the Roman household should be implemented strategically, so that the neighbors can be persuaded and not repulsed by the radically different new vision of God's family. Finally, Paul closes the letter by once again calling Timothy to confront the corrupt leaders. Paul exposes their motive to make lots of money by accumulating followers and charging high rates. They betrayed Jesus' message of content and simple living. So Paul instructs the wealthy Ephesian Christians to be rich in good works and to act generously. He encourages them to act as a people who submit all their resources to King Jesus, inspiring a final poem about how Jesus is the true king over all others. 1 Timothy is a crucially important letter in which we can gain a holistic vision of the nature and the mission of the church. What a Jesus community believes in will directly shape how that community lives and behaves. So its theologies and benefits must be constantly formed by the scriptures and the good news about Jesus. At the same time, how the church is perceived is also important. Christians should be people that are full of integrity and known for good works, serving the poor and the most vulnerable out of their devotion to the risen King Jesus. That concludes the book of 1 Timothy and Proverbs. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please post them and we can grow together in Christ by addressing them. Thank you.